Hello, my friends. It's Dr. Sharon with Clinic Reviews. Today we're talking about GI stuff. Colostomy irrigation, temporary versus permanent colostomy, and the differences between colostomy and ileostomy. So let's get started. Hello, Clinic Review family. It's Dr. Sharon with Clinic Reviews. Thank you for joining us again today as we talk about GI stuff. Y'all, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to get GI stuff on the NCLEX. It's very fundamental. So you really need to know this. And colostomies, ileostomies, you're going to find this in your fundamentals textbook. So if you want to practice questions, I would take your fundamentals textbook out, look at the GI chapter, and do all the questions at the end of that chapter. You know that this YouTube channel is a part of the Greater Clinic Review organization. We do NCLEX reviews on demand through clinicreviews.com. We do small group tutoring for a set price per month. You get a 1 month thing, and then you can also get the audios, videos of those, the recordings of them. There's 4 in a month. Each one is 3 hours long, and we kind of rotate between who does those small group tutorings. And then we have our streaming service where you can see all of our videos, not our tutoring, not our on-demand NCLEX review, but you can see all the videos that I have here on NCLEX and some additional videos. You can see all the videos that I have here on YouTube, as well as some additional videos. You can watch them there commercial free. So if you're in a rush, you want to get through all our videos really quickly, you can do our streaming service. All that stuff links is in the description below. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm doing the blue book. We're doing colostomy. You know that I teach this by doing questions, and I teach as we go along. So we'll do the questions and I'll teach it as we go through the questions. A nurse is caring for a client who recently had a colostomy placed. Which statement by the client indicates a need for further teaching? Y'all, you know I get messed up on these further teaching ones. We're looking for the false statement as it relates to a recent colostomy placement. All right. I will need to empty the pouch when it's about 1/3 full. That's fine. I don't know if 1/3 is correct, but there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It doesn't require further teaching. I'm not going to go, oh, you're wrong. You could wait till it's half full. I'm not going to say that. So A seems fine. I can change the colostomy bag every 3 to 7 days. That sounds right. I don't know the exact number for sure, but that sounds right to me. So we'll put a little question mark next to it. I will need to limit my fluid intake to prevent output. Oh, that's wrong. I know that's false. You'd never want to limit your output. You got to have good output, even with a colostomy or an ileostomy. You have to have good fluid intake, even with an ileostomy or a colostomy, so you don't get all bound up. I should avoid foods that can cause excessive gas. So, well, yeah, we always want to avoid foods that cause excessive gas. So I'm looking for the false statement. So remember I said I wasn't sure about B. I sort of put a little question mark next to it, but I know C is false. I know that absolutely. And B sounds good to me. So I'm going with C. Which type of stoma output should the nurse expect from a client with an ileostomy? All right, so I know you can't really see my abdomen. Let me just, let's see, this is my right side over here, and then transverse, and then descending. So if they have a colostomy on the right side, that's called an ileostomy, and it's going to be very liquidy stool. If they have a transverse colostomy, so it goes kind of across the abdomen here, somewhere in here, it's going to be formed but quite soft. And then if they have a descending colon, that's a colostomy there, that's going to be fully formed solid stool. All right. So which type of output would the nurse expect from an ileostomy? That's up along the right side. All the fluid, water hasn't been absorbed yet. So that's liquid stool. That's what you would expect. Which statement made by a client with a new ileostomy indicates they have emotionally accepted the ostomy. So is there an absolute right answer for this? Yes, there is. And the right answer for this is they can care for their own colostomy. So for no matter whether it's ileostomy, a transverse colostomy, a descending colostomy, when they can care for their own ostomy, that shows emotional acceptance of this, because it is a big change to their body image, right? I don't want to look at it or touch it. No, I've learned to empty the pouch and I can do it on my own. So that's caring for their own ostomy. I feel embarrassed and avoid social gatherings. No, I will let my family care for my ostomy. No. So it's caring for themselves. And it doesn't have to be the most comprehensive answer. Like they can change the bag and they can empty the bag and they can clean the skin and they can irrigate it. Okay, it doesn't have to be super extensive, just has to be something that shows they're willing to do their own care. A nurse is caring for a client with a double barrel colostomy. What is the main characteristic of this type of colostomy? So either you know this or you don't. Okay. This is the interesting thing is when people have a colostomy or an ileostomy, sometimes they remove the rectum and everything else past it. And sometimes they leave quite a bit of um, large intestine in the abdomen. Well, if they leave large intestine in the abdomen and it has nowhere to go, what are they going to do with that? Because it still will produce mucus. It's still getting blood flow just because it's not attached to anything. It's not getting any waste, but it's still producing mucus. So what are they going to do with that? So a double barrel colostomy is where they have one colostomy that is for stool and the other one is to collect mucus. So let's look at our answers and see which one best represents that. Two stomas are present, one for fecal drainage and one for mucus drainage. Well, okay, that's what I just said. One stoma is used temporarily and the other is permanent. Well, it is true that sometimes the mucus one is temporary. A lot of times after some period of time, they will take down the mucus barrel. But B isn't as good of an answer as A is. The stoma is placed in the ileum rather than the colon. That's not it. The stoma is created by bringing both ends of the intestine to the skin surface. No, you'd have nothing coming out of there but mucus. So A is the best answer, even though the one that's used for mucus is often temporary. A is a more comprehensive answer. And just so you know, the more distal stoma is always the mucus one, and the more proximal, so proximal means closer to the center of your body, the more proximal one is for stool, and the more distal one is used for mucus. A client is going home with a temporary colostomy. What is the most accurate explanation to provide? A temporary colostomy will eventually need to be converted to a permanent one. A temporary colostomy can be reversed after healing. There is no difference in care between a temporary and permanent colostomy. A temporary colostomy does not require pouching since it will be reversed. All right. So temporary colostomies, it's not that unusual to do temporary colostomies. Sometimes they'll have big abdominal issues or they'll have some kind of issue and they need to do a temporary colostomy until everything heals in the gut. And they need to let incisions heal and whatever else they need to do. I'm no surgeon, but it's not that unusual for colostomies to be temporary. And so they are temporary. So which answer best represents that we need to let things heal? So a temporary colostomy will eventually need to be converted. No, that's absolutely wrong. Temporary colostomy can reverse after healing. That's true. It's a little vague. After healing of what? What's got to heal? I don't know. So it's a little vague, but we're going to keep it on the list because it is a true statement. There's no difference in care between a temporary and permanent colostomy. I don't know what that means exactly, but let's come back to it. A temporary colostomy does not require pouching since it will be reversed. Okay, I know that's not true. So we have to choose between B and C, and maybe we don't love either one of these answers. So I go, B's true, but it's a little vague. C, there's no difference in care between a temporary and permanent colostomy. I don't know what they mean by care, but there is differences between them, not necessarily in how they look, but in the long-term outcome of them. So there is differences between them in the long term. So B is a better answer. Remember, the right answer is the right answer because of the other answers. And B is just a better answer. So what it's saying is, what is the most accurate explanation to provide? That's the question. A client is going home with a temporary colostomy. What is the most accurate explanation to provide? And so when I think about kind of generally about a temporary colostomy, B is the better answer, that it's going to be reversed. That's like the big idea when it comes to temporary colostomies. I don't want to focus on the fact that there's similarities between permanent and temporary colostomies. I want to focus on the differences and that this one can be and probably will be reversed. Which of the following would indicate a potential complication in a client with a new ileostomy? Now, remember, I told you the ileostomy is the ascending colon. They lose a lot of fluid and they end up losing a lot of electrolytes. So this is real loose stool. So it's like having diarrhea. So what is the risk associated with diarrhea? And maybe that won't be the answer, but that's what I think of when I see this question. Okay, potential complication. The stoma is red and moist. Well, that's what it's supposed to look like, red and moist. Client reports mild discomfort at the stoma site. Well, it's new, so that's not unusual, so that's okay. The client reports mild bleeding when cleaning around the stoma. Well, again, it's new and it is red and moist, so it could bleed a little bit. That's not that surprising. The client reports stoma output of less than 200 mils over the past 24 hours. So remember, this is supposed to be having adequate output and it is supposed to have loose stool. So if they've had less than 200 mils over the last 24 hours, that's something I am concerned about. The others, and the reason I say that is because I'm not concerned about the others at all. So when I look at D, I think, well, I don't know exactly how much they're supposed to have out, but 200 mils is not very much. And I want to make sure that it's working. And so 200, I'd be a little bit concerned about that because they're supposed to be having probably more than that. So, and I know A, B, and C are fine. So remember, often I choose the answer that I choose because the other answers are clearly not the right answer. A nurse is caring for 4 clients who have all recently had surgery to create a colostomy. Which of the following is most likely to have their colostomy reversed at a later date? A 45-year-old with a 25-year history of Crohn's disease, a 62-year-old shot in the abdomen during a home invasion, 39-year-old diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer, 52-year-old client frequently admitted for diverticulitis. So permanent colostomies are used for cancer very commonly. So permanent colostomies are often used to treat cancer and for chronic GI disorders that cause inflammation and problems in the GI tract. And so when I look at this, I say, well, A is a chronic disease. They have a 25-year history of Crohn's disease. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a permanent colostomy. B is a 62-year-old with an acute problem. He was shot in the abdomen, and it doesn't tell me any more than that. So I say, well, at least it's an acute problem. So that's more likely to be a temporary colostomy. C is cancer. I'm going with permanent on that one. D is another chronic disease, and they're frequently admitted with inflammation. So they probably have diverticulosis, but they're frequently admitted with diverticulitis, which is inflammation of those little pouches in the GI tract. So it wouldn't be at all surprising for one to have a permanent colostomy, C to have A, 1A, C and D to all have permanent colostomy. So the one that makes the most sense here, and I don't have to say for sure, but it says most likely, which of the following is most likely to have it reversed at a later date? I'm going to say the one with the acute abdominal problem. The nurse is preparing to irrigate a client's colostomy, which is the best explanation to give the client about the purpose of colostomy irrigation. And I just want to be clear, you never irrigate an ileostomy. Okay, ileostomies already have very loose stool. There's no need to irrigate an ileostomy. If nothing's coming out of it, you need to call the doctor. Do not irrigate it, okay? So why would we irrigate the others? Well, let's see what the answers are. Irrigation helps to keep the skin around the stoma healthy. No, it doesn't do anything for the skin. Irrigation prevents the need for an ostomy appliance. Well, no. You're still going to have something to collect the stool in if something comes out. Irrigation allows for regulation of bowel movements. That may be true. So I'm going to leave C on the list. Irrigation is only necessary for an ileostomy, not a colostomy. All right, I know D is false. So I know that A, B, and D are false. So I look at C and I go, well, I mean, it makes sense to me. So if I use my common sense, that makes sense to me. And I think the reason they say it allows for regulation of bowel movements is if you don't want to be having bowel movements like in the middle of the day while you're at work, you could irrigate it once a day. And that's how often it's irrigated, once a day at the most. You could irrigate it in the evening, have your bowel movement in the evening or at night, and then you could regulate how often you have your bowel movement. So I don't think it's that they're so concerned about getting like an obstruction or anything like that. It has more to do with controlling when you have the output so you don't worry about the smell and some of the other issues. A client with a double barrel colostomy asks how long the second stoma will be needed. The nurse responds, the second stoma would be the mucus stoma. The second stoma is permanent, will remain for life. I don't think that's true. Both stomas are permanent. See, A and B say the same thing. When two answers say the same thing, I know neither one of them is right for a single choice question. The second stoma will only be needed for a few days. That seems unlikely. It's hard to believe they'd put a stoma in for just a few days. The second stoma is usually temporary, maybe reversed after healing. So D is a good NCLEX answer, and let me say why. It says usually and may. When answers have usually in may, I go, well, anything could happen. Anything usually happens or may happen. So I go, that's just a good NCLEX answer. I know A and B can't be correct because they say the same thing. And C doesn't make sense to me. So if I'm using my common sense, I have to pick D. What is the most important action a nurse should take when assessing a newly created colostomy stoma? Okay, so this is about the stoma specific. So we're assessing it. What is the most important action a nurse should take? All right, well, let's see. Check that the stoma is red and moist. Well, definitely red and moist is what it should look like. And that means it's getting adequate blood flow. Okay, if it's pale and dry, that means it's not getting adequate blood flow. It could necrose and die. We don't want that. Ensure that the stoma is pale and dry. Absolutely not. Measure the stoma for proper appliance fit. Well, I could do that, but it's not certainly not the most important thing for a new stoma. Avoid touching the stoma during assessment. Again, I don't have to avoid touching it. I may avoid touching it. Maybe they don't want me to touch it. That's fine, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to make sure it's getting blood flow, which is looking at it to make sure it's red and moist. Which statement by a client indicates the need for further teaching about colostomy irrigation? You know I mess these up. Further teaching means false statement. So false, false, false. I'm looking for the false statement as it relates to colostomy irrigation. I will irrigate my colostomy at the same time each day. Well, that's fine. They can do that. It's once a day, not more than once a day, but once a day is fine. So true. I should use tap water at room temperature for irrigation. That's actually true. Room temperature is fine. They could go 1 or 2 degrees above. Actually, they could go up to body temperature. Okay, so they could do room temperature, they could do body temperature, but there's nothing wrong with B, but they could go up to 98, 99 degrees, somewhere in there. Room temperature is okay too. C, I can skip irrigation if I'm not having bowel movements. No, that would be not a good time to skip the irrigation. If you're not having bowel movements, I would think you could skip the irrigation if you have a bowel movement at the time you normally have a bowel movement. So there's no need to irrigate. Like if you always have a bowel movement in the evening and you have your bowel movement, there's no reason to irrigate it after that, but not if you're not having bowel movement. So C seems false. I will stop irrigation if I feel any cramping or discomfort. Well, that's a true statement. That's always good. If you have pain, stop what you're doing. That's kind of a generally true statement. So again, we're looking for further teaching, the false statement when it comes to irrigation. So C is the false statement. So just to be clear, the teaching isn't always that clear on how warm the water should be. Don't ever choose hot water. The blue book says body temperature for the temperature of the water, and some other places will say room temperature. They're not going to ask you to choose between room temperature and body temperature. What you don't want to choose is cold water, and you don't want to choose hot water. If they give you the option for room temperature or body temperature, those are both okay. The nurse is teaching a client how to irrigate their colostomy. Which of the following instructions should be included? So I'm looking for the true statement this time about irrigating the colostomy. True statement about irrigation. Insert the catheter into the stoma about 4 inches. That is false. So when you're irrigating a colostomy, the device you use actually looks a lot like a tube feeding bag. And you know how at the end of a tube feeding bag, you almost have a cone. It's usually orange. And it's like a cone at the end of it. That end is what you stick into the end of your colostomy. And you don't stick it like all the way in. You just put it like halfway in the little cone. Okay, so that's what, maybe half an inch. So it's really only about half an inch that it goes in. Suspend the irrigation. So A is false. Suspend the irrigation container about 18 inches above the stoma. So if my stoma's here, I would suspend my irrigation about here. So that makes sense because you don't want it to run in so fast that like you get cramping, right? So if I hung it way up here, I could get a lot of cramping. If I hang it right about here, I'm much more likely not to get cramping. So B seems like a true statement. C, use hot water for irrigation. No, I don't want to use hot or cold. D, perform irrigation every 12 hours. No, it's once a day. And you get to choose the time of day that you want. So B is the correct answer when it comes to irrigation. A client with an ileostomy reports experiencing frequent watery output. Which complication is the client most at risk for? So ileostomy, I would expect them to have watery output. Frequent, I don't know about, but if they do have frequent watery output, there is a risk associated with that. And that's the same as with any type of diarrhea. Okay, so electrolyte imbalance, yes. Stoma prolapse, no. Bowel obstruction, no. Skin breakdown. So the question is, are they more likely to have skin breakdown or electrolyte imbalance? Well, if they're using the device and treating the stoma correctly, they should not have skin breakdown. Even if it's watery, they could, but if they're doing everything correctly, they shouldn't have skin breakdown. Whereas if they're having a lot of watery diarrhea, they could definitely have an electrolyte imbalance. So that's the true statement here. A nurse is assessing a client with a colostomy and notices the stoma is pale and dusky. What is the nurse's priority action? All right. So if I can only do one thing, that's priority action. That's best. It's a best question. Most important, priority, that kind of thing. Okay. So a best question. So which of these, I know this is bad. The stoma's not getting blood. So what do I have to do? Apply a new pouching system and reassess? Okay, I've got something not getting blood. It's going to die if I don't do something. So A is not a good an option. Notify the healthcare provider. That sounds like a good option. We've got a stoma that's going to necrose if we don't do anything. Increase the client's fluid intake. I don't see how that's going to help. Document the finding is normal. Absolutely not. So the only option is B, notify the healthcare provider. It's the only option that is right. Okay, so that is colostomies. I hope you learned something with that. And if you heard my dogs barking in the background throughout this, they were barking in the background throughout this. They weren't in the room with me. They're at the door barking at Amazon or somebody. I don't know what they were doing. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks for being part of the Clinic Review family. Take care.